small time to wait because we are streaming simultaneously in Zoom and in YouTube, but now everything seems to be working. I have lots of thumbs up from the other side of this room. Okay, thank you very much for joining in. A good afternoon to everyone. Bon après-midi à tous. We are starting with session number 2, which will be a high-level panel discussion on the role and competitiveness of EU's research and development for sustainable agriculture. Please again use the question and answers feature in Zoom for addressing questions, which will be summarized at the end, and we will try to insert as many questions as possible. Not to waste time, I just introduce our wonderful moderator for today. Welcome, Marlene Fiaschi, Managing Director at Science Business. I think most of the people who are in Brussels know Marlene quite well. She has joined Science Business in 2011, and she leads the company's operation and growth strategy. But before that, Marlene has had an extensive experience in the European Commission itself, so she knows quite well what's happening in Brussels between the different stakeholders. Marlene, we are very, very happy that you are today with us. Warm welcome to the other panelists, and I hand the screen over to you.
Thank you, Löschen, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction. So for those who don't know, Science Business is a news and communications company specialized in research and innovation policies at the European level. And indeed, I will serve as moderator for this session that will look at the role and the competitiveness of the EU's research and development for sustainable agriculture. For those who haven't followed this morning's session, I suggest I just start with a quick word of context. Well, since the European Court of Justice ruled in July 2018 that modern precision genome editing or novel breeding techniques remain subject to the 2001 EU directive banning GMOs, the pressure to reverse the legislation have significantly increased. And as we heard in the previous sessions, the scientific community has pushed to rethink the EU's GMO regulatory framework. In fact, in the summer 2019, researchers from about 120 institutes around Europe said the EU's ban, and I quote, no longer correctly reflects the current state of scientific knowledge. So the statement is strong, and that's one of the things that we will cover with this panel. The European Commission is currently working on a study on the status of novel genomic techniques and the Union law, with a report due in April 2021. And as a result of this study, a proposal for a new legislation could possibly, and I said possibly, take place. So during this session, we will really be looking at the policy landscape. So we will run discussion as a policy discussion. And the objective is really to understand the state of play around the research on novel breeding techniques in Europe and understand their role or their potential role in the transition towards sustainable agriculture. So by crossing the views of policymakers, representatives from the industry and from the research community, we will aim through an open debate to better understand what is at stake here for Europe and really assess the odds of seeing the legislation on genetic engineering and resulting crops evolving in the coming years. So with this word of introduction, it is now my pleasure to introduce the 6 panelists that have kindly agreed to be here with us today. So first of all, Viola van Cramon-Taubadel, you're a German member of the European Parliament with the group of the Greens, European Free Alliance. We also have with us Wolfgang Burtscher, Director-General for Agriculture and Rural Development at the European Commission. Also from the European Commission, Sabine Jülicher, Director for Food and Feed Safety, as well as Innovation in the Directorate-General for Health and Food Safety, so European Commission. And we also have with us Petra Jorash, Manager plant breeding innovation advocacy at Euroseed, a trade association representing the voice of European seed sector. Pekka Pesonen, who has just joined us, Secretary-General of Copa and Cogeca, European Farmers Association, and finally Dirk Hinze, Science Director of the Center for Plant Systems Biology at the Flemish Institute for Biotechnology at Ghent University. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Before we kick off the discussion, just as Lucien mentioned, we will take questions from the audience, so don't hesitate to ask some questions. I promise that we will take at least some. I understand that the activity on the chat is quite intensive, but we will take a few questions, and you can also interact on Twitter, the hashtag of the conference being genome editing, or you can also use the two other hashtags, hashtag Leopoldina and hashtag DFG. With this, let's deep dive into the topic. And Viola, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. As you may have, as you will notice very quickly, since we are running that as a policy discussion, all the speakers kindly agreed that I address them by their first name. So thank you for that. So Viola, there is, one of the leitmotif of this conference is very much to look at linkages between the different stakeholders. So plant breeding techniques are linked to research and innovation, also to sustainable agriculture, and also to consumer protection. And while we're still debating on the rightness of novel breeding techniques, we know that research and innovation have created or is still creating new results. At the same time, the agribusiness follows its own logic, and in parallel, consumers want more quality of agricultural products for the same price. Unfortunately, at this point in time, a common agenda is lacking. So my question to you is how to achieve such a common agenda?
Well, first of all, oh, sorry, it starts again. Thanks a lot for having me on this extraordinary panel. Since I was listening also to the first session, it is always very hard to speak after such distinguished experts, such as my team and the lawyer, the legal expert, and while they really try to figure out the pros and cons in a very structured and systematic way, while they also referred to the very politicized debate on one hand, which is of course right. So I think we have to also look what is the track record of the, I'm so sorry. What is the track record of the genome editing, and what is the track record of transgenetic experience? And what my team has, for example, focused very much on, and I can go align with it, that with genome editing, we really would have an improvement for smaller and also public organizations. But also, I think from the European Parliament side, I think we have to introduce better scrutiny instruments and also try to find out how to oversight really this research and maybe new common agenda when we would like to talk about. It's no secret that especially our group is very reluctant to have or to come along, to come out with a, let's say, new proposal for a GMO legal basis, especially because the precautionary principle and the non-GMO labeling is of utmost importance for the majority of the group, but also for many of the biological based and organic based farmers. So there is, let's say, a big trade of let's say, the innovation part and how much in genome editing sort or genome editing breeding could be implemented as an organic. We have not even talked about that because, of course, this is not really an issue which is debated now and could then be also part of a real sustainable agriculture. While I see right now the reservations is absolutely great, and it's not just in our party, it is all over the society. And I think this is also important to say that the consumer preferences right now is very much, I think in Germany, it's even 3/4 very much against the use or the consumption of genome driven food, and that makes it very difficult to explain what is genome editing, what is the new or the innovation of genome editing, why is it different from transgenic sorts, and so what is the real progress, and why is it so difficult now to explain a little bit more in detail for the broader audience and for the consumers the non-detection of this new breeding and sort. So I think that many of the, let's say, reservations are rooted in what have Martin also mentioned, the patterns of life, monopolies, market monopolies, industrialized food systems. So if the innovative part of the breeding industry can really prove that the majority of the new breeding sorts would cover this public good and would really go into sorts which could contribute to malnutrition and could really give a solution for the question of food shortages and so on and so forth. This would maybe make a difference, but so far I think the social and economical questions are not really in the focus, are not really the priority of the commercialized breeding and sorts, and that makes it very difficult right now to even start a discussion.
Thank you. That sets the scene very nicely. You've raised a number of very important points here, so I think we'll come back to some of them a bit later, because the reality is that the European food system is embedded in the world market, and there are different ways of handling the question of GMOs and genetic engineering around the world. And Sabine, can I come to you, because one of the main issues that consumers have is indeed the potential role of GMOs on health, and agriculture, food and health are very closely linked. So can I ask you, well, how can we make sure, or first, how can we define a good regulation for novel agricultural products if we cannot detect the technology behind it? And one of the issues, or one of the differences around the world is in fact the disclosure of the use of these techniques. So what do you think? How can we define a good regulation for novel agricultural products?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity for the European regulator to speak on the topic, because that's what we are in that sense. I mean, me and my colleagues, we are responsible for the authorization of GMOs for the European market. So maybe to give a bit of context here, as you rightly say, we have existing EU legislation. If I may slightly correct, the function is not to ban GMOs, but it is giving a frame to allow genetically modified organisms safely onto the EU market, which means, and there I come to your question on health, that prior to allowing these products on the market, we have a very, very thorough safety assessment, which is done on basis of science. It's a long process, it's a cumbersome process for the applicants, but it is a process that has, ensured that the GMOs we have on the European market, mainly for food and feed users in particular, that they are safe. So in that context, we have a framework. It's not the youngest, not the freshest, but it is an existing framework. And indeed, the court has confirmed in its ruling in 2018 that genome-edited products are covered by this GMO legislation. And I think that was also the moment when really the discussion was triggered. What does all of this mean? What does it mean for research? What does it mean for Europe and the possibility of Europe to use these techniques for various purposes? Now, you mentioned also the study that the Council has basically asked to the Commission. It's a very comprehensive study. It's ongoing. You're right, the results will be there in April 2021. But it is really there also to look into certain practical questions, one of which is, detection. How can we detect? But the concept of this study is much broader. It looks into, benefits, concerns, the ethical aspects, the robustness of risk assessment, also what are current and future scientific and technological developments. I mean, what are we seeing coming already onto the market in third countries, for example, and also concerning societal implication, ethical questions, and so on and so forth. So it's a very broad, very deep-going study, very much with the involvement of stakeholders and member states who have provided us with this mandate. And by April 2021, as I said, the study should be delivered. And the Commission may, if appropriate, present a legal proposal. I have to be very, very clear at this moment in time. The study is ongoing. We are doing this entirely open-minded. We want to see the results and the outcome. The decision on opening the regulatory framework or proposing something new and different is really still to come. So you had a very particular question on, detection, how important it is to detect the technology behind. That is indeed correct. We also mandated the European Union reference laboratories to look into that question. They will deliver a series of reports. But what is clear, if we speak about a known DNA alteration, it is very well possible to develop detection methods. So detection in principle is feasible if we know what is the alteration. We also asked member states, because they are responsible for enforcement, also at the point of import, what is their experience, what strategies could there be. But I would also like to remind that experience from other sectors that we have in Europe, where you cannot detect with a method the claim or the content. For example, say origin indication. I mean, there is no method in the true sense to verify the origin of a product, but through other means like traceability, like paper trails. Well, in future we'll rather talk about blockchain. It is very well possible, to find an alternative system to a detection method. So I think that should help us for the future. And in this context, I mean, to bluntly answer your question about, a good regulation, not only for novel products, it should allow for innovation. It should allow for confirmation of safety, and safety in the widest sense. I may refer also to our recent strategy on the farm-to-fork for a sustainable food system. So we will be looking in future not only at safety, but also contributions to sustainability. And a good regulation, in principle, should allow, for these objectives to be met. It should allow also for Europe to be a place for research, for developing innovation. And I would not now really link it very, very firmly to the detection method or the ability of detecting, an alteration.
Very good. Thank
you.
Thank you. You mentioned the farm to fork strategy, so it's time to turn to Wolfgang. The Commission with DG Agri in the driving seat has put forward its ambition farm to fork strategy. And again, this is what I mentioned before. It's about connectivity between different areas, between different stakeholders, between different topics. So the first question to you is a general question. How do you see the linkages between research and innovation on one side, but also plant breeders, farmers, and consumers, if Europe wants to be a champion here?
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and good afternoon to the colleagues, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. Indeed, the agriculture is facing quite some challenges. Agriculture is victim of the climate change. Just look at the loss of harvests in Romania this year. But at the same time, agriculture needs to become more sustainable because we also contribute to the deterioration of environment, biodiversity, climate. And the farm to fork strategy in that respect clearly indicates that farmers and agriculture has to contribute indeed to more sustainability. And you have seen the targets. It's about reducing risky pesticides. It's about using less fertilizer. And the question arises, what kind of research and innovation do we need to address these challenges? Because with our conventional methods, we will not really succeed. So I think everybody agrees that we require research and innovation to make agriculture more resilient, climate adaptation, but at the same time also to make agriculture more sustainable. So everybody agrees about research and innovation. And the farm to fork strategy has also indicated that new technologies need to be looked at in this context. And I think Sabine has just pointed out the procedure that will lead to this assessment. Now, I think what is extremely important for us is in agriculture is that for the reasons I have just indicated, I think research and innovation, including on gene editing, is very important because it might constitute a tool to address exactly the challenges which we are facing. At the same time, it's also a question of competitiveness of the agricultural policy for the reasons you have set out, Marilyn. Now, evidently, we will look very carefully at the results of this study, as Sabine has just pointed out, and the further action will depend indeed on the assessment of this research. But I would like to make 2-3 points. I think it's very good to have excellent science and research, and I know it from my former business, but that's only half of the story. And the other story is the point that Viola has referred to. Science needs to convince society and consumers, because as agriculture, we are also interested in that we have markets and people are buying these products. So I think it is really crucially important that we have excellent science, but certainly equally important to convince society of the possible advantages of these technologies, at the same time pointing out the risks if there are. Now, I think a key question in this further discussion will certainly be, and again, I do not anticipate the result of the study, is really the question in the public debate, and science promotes that these techniques are solutions for many of the issues which we are facing, make agriculture more resilient. And I think it's very important that we can prove that this is true. And it's certainly interesting to see whether parts of these promises have been delivered with the conventional GMO techniques. I think somebody needs to be sure to say, listen, the new techniques, they might deliver better or even more targeted. So I think it's really important that this key element, that these new technologies need to be safe in terms of human safety, but also in terms of environmental impact is very crucial. And we need holistic approaches in this domain. So this is what I would say at this point in time.
And that's very good. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Can we turn to the industry now? Petra, can I come to you? And so, yeah, you represent the plant breeding industry. There are already some novel breeding techniques that exist and that go far beyond the traditional ones or beyond genetic engineering. And you are, as an industry, you must be interested in remaining competitive or even in being more competitive. And obviously this is a legitimate interest. So what is the position of the industry when it comes to regulating novel breeding techniques in Europe?
Thanks, Marilyn, for the kind introduction. And thank you also for inviting me to this nice panel discussion. Yeah, indeed. So maybe I first introduce you a bit to the European plant breeding and seed sector. So it's a highly diverse sector and it's highly innovative. And why is it? What we see is our companies reinvest up to 20% of their annual turnover into research and development. And that's a huge amount of investments. And of course, they need to also recoup their investments from selling their respective products on the seed market. So the EU seed market is about 20% of the global seed market at the moment, and the breeding companies release around 3,500 new plant varieties per year to the European farmers, and that provides, of course, a wide variety of choice of crops for the farmers to be able to grow competitive products, also in view of the global market, of course. Nevertheless, we are a global sector as well. So, but we have, of course, local roots. We did an internal survey within our sector, where we asked our companies if they are active in using these new breeding techniques like genome editing, and 98% of the companies who replied to our questionnaire, which were 62 companies in total, they are acting on a global level. So they are either having R&D facilities in different parts of the world, breeding facilities, they do seed sales and seed production on an international basis. So this means we are an international sector, and of course, international competitiveness is key for us. So it doesn't make sense to only look into, let's say, the national or the regional legislation and regulations. A harmonized scope of regulatory oversight when we look at the global level is key for our sector. And this can also be seen. So 20% of the seed which is produced worldwide is traded somehow between different parts of the world. And so our companies are very much interested in this, let's say, harmonized scope of regulatory oversight, and how concretely do we look at that? And that was mentioned already in this first session this morning. So we have a pretty similar position like the scientific position which was presented by Leopoldina-DFG. So in our view, we should not differentiate by looking at technologies, but we should differentiate how these technologies are used and what the outcome of these technologies is. So having a look at a tool like genome editing doesn't make sense if you can use the tool in many different ways. It's the same if you would like to regulate the use of a hammer, for example. You can use it for putting a nail into the wall, but you can also use it to kill somebody. So you need to look at the outcome, and we have a very differentiated view. We say if the outcome is something which is similar to what you can also do by conventional breeding techniques. And we addressed the issue of detectability and for especially distinguishability already. Then it should not be regulated as a GMO, because in the end you could have two similar products. One would be regulated as GM, the other would be a conventional variety. So it would not make sense to regulate them differently. And so that's our positioning. And for that, we would also suggest a targeted amendment of the respective basic regulation, so the 2001/18 directive.
Understood. Thank you. We have two more voices to hear before we get into the group discussion. So can I ask the next two speakers to go with brief introductory remark? I'll just go to the farmers now, Pekka. So you're the voice of the farmers here. So I'll ask bluntly, do you see a role for genome editing in this transition towards sustainable agriculture?
Thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to take part in this panel discussion. Indeed, well, that's an easy question for a farming community. Irrespective of what we want, this will be a part of the reality that we will be facing. And I find it very strange, also professional, and I'm an agronomist myself, and when we look at the recent discussion in the EU, we're quite disappointed for the fact that it is the EU and the Western nations in general that actually have created the abundance of food and green revolution. We actually sustain billions of people in the planet, and most of them actually have sufficient foodstuffs. And in this respect, now when the European Union has had the internal talks, especially some of these technologies, we find it irrational, in fact, from the European Union own perspective, that we do not actually value our own scientific work and the progress that we have shown over the decades. It doesn't mean that we are without criticism when it comes to the outcome, and that we need to be also realistic with. And that's why farm to fork and the biodiversity strategies are really important as part of the Green Deal and supporting the CAP in coming up with let's say alternatives, new ways of thinking, and especially from the environmental perspective. But it is quite often what the citizens want, the consumers cannot afford. And this is something that we need to keep in mind when we look at the market realities, because we are increasingly part of the international community when it comes to trade. Like seed sector actually is one of the front runners in terms of being internationally linked all across borders. What happens inside the EU borders cannot remain only in the EU. And I would love to say that let's close the borders and let's say develop our own environment and our reality here. This is no longer realistic. And I would like to draw the attention to the ongoing discussion on let's say for instance livestock, or how should we eat differently. Most of these alternatives that have been presented to the marketplace, especially like replacement of meat typically, is a declaration, and you would see the difference with the natural products that we have in the marketplace. So we are not very consistent in terms of consumer approach. But let's talk about what we need to do. And of course, we are very much interested in these technologies, especially gene editing, for the fact that it actually gives us some alternatives. It actually could potentially replace some of the questionable technologies that we have employed in agriculture. They are not necessarily unsafe, but if the citizens say that they are no longer acceptable, we have to take a look into the alternatives. And in this respect, we put a lot of faith into the gene editing, genome editing in general. And if we look at historically what has happened over the past 150 years, I think we have to accept the fact that about 70% of the performance improvement in our productivity actually originates from better genetic material of both plants and livestock. we actually produce food with less environmental and, let's say, generally speaking, environmental footprint. And this is a general trend and general rule for all economic sectors. We have to improve our productivity. And this is something that sometimes I miss in the EU statements. I would like to conclude by pointing out that while we talk about these technologies, we need to accept the fact that farmers and agri-food chain is there to produce food and ensure food security. Secondly, we have to do that in a competitive manner, internationally increasingly. And then finally, why I'm here is that we defend the interest of farmers' economic, let's say, prosperity, and it is finally agricultural income that matters. Thank you.
Thank you. There are so many points that are being raised by each of you that this discussion could go on for 2 hours. So we have a scientist with us, and I think, Dirk, how do you want to react from what you heard? There are so many uncertainties, so many question marks, especially on the consumer side. So do you want, well, that's a very tough challenge. You have, let's say, 2 minutes to explain what are the options on the table to reconcile the divergent opinions around the use of genetic engineering. How do you want to do that?
Thank you very, very much, Marilena, for this kind introduction. 2 minutes is very, very short for such an important issue. I would also like to thank the Leopoldina and the DFG for this very interesting meeting and to give a plant scientist also a forum here. Of course, all what we eat, all what we produce for food is actually man-made. And over the centuries, actually, and of course, certainly in the last decades, science and plant scientists have been greatly contributed to the success of this human activity. And so, and currently, actually, by a worldwide effort of plant scientists all over the world during the last 4 decades, in particularly with the discovery of DNA and so on, we have now actually a very good understanding of many genes and many processes which contribute to beneficial traits of crops, being disease-resistant, food quality, efficiency by which plants using nitrogen, phosphor, yield, and so on. But using this information in classical breeding processes is a really slow process, and it takes often many years actually to introduce the desired trait in the food that we would like to consume. And I think with the current climate crisis and with the sustainability crisis, we don't have that time anymore. So in view of climate change and sustainability, we need to enhance the precision and the speed by which we can develop new drought-resilient crops, disease-resistant crops, crops with reduced environmental footprint. And the question was asked, actually, these examples are already there. Actually, they're already currently in a number of places actually commercialized. And this is really completely in agreement with the Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy, in fact, which states that we have to develop innovative ways to reduce the dependency on pesticide fertilizers and so on. But at the same time to provide society with sufficient, nutritious, sustainable and affordable food. So we plant scientists all over the globe, I have to say, unisono state that genome editing is an amazing breeding technology, achieving essentially the same as what we can do with classical breeding, but only faster, much more cost effective, and with a much greater precision. So in many of the application of precision breeding, no foreign genetic information remains in the crop. And I can tell you this consensus is also shared in Europe. We have, for example, an organization called EUSAGE, which stands for European Sustainable Agriculture Through Genome Editing, which is representing 132 European plant science centers across almost all European countries, with the exception, I think, of Luxembourg and Malta, where not too much plant science is actually happening. And we strongly argue that genome editing can really make a great contribution to the development of a productive, healthy, variety-rich, and eco-friendly agriculture. And such innovation-driven agriculture, I would say such modern agriculture, it can perfectly coexist with organic farming. But most importantly, it should not be banned from Europe, as we will miss out on very critical innovations that, and also we will be subject to trade restriction that will jeopardize European food security. Let me conclude with a final remark. So often the so-called precautionary principle is used like for new technology. We discussed this already. This principle should be proportional to the real risk and should not discriminate between those who can use genome editing and who cannot. Crops that will be subjected to target genome edited, which do not contain foreign DNA, do not present, in our view, any other health or environmental risk than plants obtained through classical breeding technology. The features of the plant, rather than technique used to generate it, should determine its regulatory status. And we plant scientists also would like to call up on a kind of reverse precautionary principle and ask and confront the society what will happen to European agriculture if breeders and scientists cannot use genome editing anymore while the rest of the world, which is actually the case, is embracing it. In such case, we might suffer more and more problems with drought, disease, low productivity, and necessitated the import of crops from other parts of the world. Is this the Europe that we want? It's time to call on all of us and from all kind of opinions, really to join forces and really to use science and innovation to make agriculture and food production more sustainable in a world facing problems with population, climate change, and environmental degradation. And to end with a quote of a famous person, listen to the scientist. Thank you.
Okay. So, I'll ask the first question, okay, to all of you, and then Lucien, if you want, I'll come to you just in a second. If you want to ask a few questions or to read out a couple of questions from the audience, but just to get the discussion going, we've heard that there's plenty going on from a research and innovation point of view. That's the excellent research we have in Europe. Is just as good in that novel breeding techniques area than in other areas. But I also hear that there's a very high level of caution on the policy-making sides and also on the Green Party in the Parliament. So I want to ask, well, these novel breeding techniques are flourishing everywhere in the world. So don't you think that Europe also has a responsibility to regulate the use of these novel techniques and GMOs, as it successfully did with data protection or chemical products with Bridge, or as it's ambitioning to do with artificial intelligence? Isn't it time to regulate to secure a proper use of these novel techniques?
May I quickly reply to this? I mean, yes, of course we will, but I'm not so sure whether we will be the front runner of this. I mean, it doesn't have to be the green group. So there are others who are regularly much more in favor of, let's say, this innovative genome editing breedings, and my problem is I'm the minority in this group, and I share all what was being said before. So that's not a big deal. But I do consider that the majority of the group has a different opinion, and this is widely shared also by the Greens in, I think, mainly all parties in all member states. And as I said, it's not just the green consumer, it is, I guess, the society. So I think what would help is really explaining what you're doing it for, and also maybe what my team has mentioned in the morning, taking some of the experience you have done in Asia and Africa, where you obviously have empirical data, where is the health of the farmers have improved with the application of those sorts, where is really a reduction of pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, and so on, and really show to the broader audience here in Germany, really try to convince the people by the facts, I would say, and bring the researchers from those countries to Germany, let them explain why, for their purposes, it makes more sense than to applicate those and to use those breedings and genome editing sort. I mean, really try to explain why you want this, why it is important, why this progress is necessary for Europe, but also for the global situation in terms of nutrition. This would be my advice, because I see always we are trying to convince the least, let's say, affiliated ones. But start with a broader audience. Start in the schools. Start wherever you want. But don't tell always the Greens they have to be the front runner for this project. I mean, as I said, I'm more sympathizing with this with the whole approach than anybody else. But nevertheless, I see there's a big reluctance, and not just in the Green Party, but in the society as such.
Wolfgang, you seem to agree. Do you have any advice in terms of improving science communications?
I entirely agree, because I firstly agree with Dirk. Listen to scientists. That's crucially important, but it's not enough, because you have to convince the society, and politicians, they listen to scientists, but they have votes, they need majorities. So you need the society to convince. And I think what Viola has indicated and you have referred to is exactly what one needs. Examples that these techniques are able to address our sustainability challenges. You use less pesticide, you do this. But I think another element which I find personally very true and very important, and I'm agnostic on it. Dirk, you said there are hundreds and thousands of plant scientists. That is very good, but is it holistic? Have you checked with other people? What is the consequences on biodiversity? I have no clue what it is, but are these elements covered? We need holistic approaches. And I think that's also very important to convince people. I mean, it's also about the scale of changes that might have impact in many other areas. Are we really sure that these things are well assessed? So I think, again, for the reasons that Pekka has set out, we are, agriculture is certainly very favorable to take up these innovative techniques. But if you want to have a regulatory framework or politicians to go in that direction, you need to have this kind of assurances.
Petra.
I completely agree that we need to have good examples, and that we also need to show that we can deliver. I completely agree with this. But what I see is we are in a difficult situation. What we can show is plant breeding has delivered in the past to help agriculture to be more sustainable. I mean, we shouldn't ignore that plant breeding has always already produced varieties which are more resistant to pests and diseases, which allow less pesticide and fertilizer use. So that we have done in the past already, and this is proven. It's a track record of success. But we also need to see that technology is going ahead, so we can be more efficient in that. And what we are doing with these new techniques is exactly, we follow the same, let's say, goals, breeding goals, which we had in the past: be more pest resistance, etc., more yield with less resource input, but with new technology. So it's nothing which is completely changing, let's say, revolutionizing plant breeding in view of its goals, but it's an additional tool in the toolbox of the breeder, which makes him or her more able to reach those goals. And I think we have this track record of success. We don't have it for those new technologies here in Europe yet, but we are in a bit difficult situation. As long as they are regulated as GMO, we won't have them on the market. We heard it earlier, there was no GM approval for cultivation since the end of the 90s. So we wouldn't be able to deliver as long as those products are regulated as GMO. Of course, people in other parts of the world might be able to deliver and also show the success, but I can already foresee the counter arguments. Well, that might work for Africa, but that wouldn't work for Europe. Show that it works for Europe. And for this, we are in a very difficult situation at the moment.
Okay, Sabine, you want to come in very short, because I'm told that there are many questions in the
Yes, of course.
audience.
No, I mean, I think we have to be very clear. There is regulation, and Petra just said it. They are regulated, new breeding techniques and their products are regulated under the GMO framework. So my question is really to the industry, to scientists, what level of different regulation do you want to see? Do you want to see total deregulation? do you accept that the potential impact of any product, any outcome is assessed for safety, for health, for environment, for several aspects, maybe also for its contribution to the sustainability agenda? I mean, I'm trying to understand the argument because there is regulation, there is a way to the European market. Again, it is not an easy way. On the one hand, because of the scientific evidence, maybe, but also due to the political discussion around every authorization. So, I mean, I think we have to differentiate a little bit between the one scenario that says new breeding techniques are banned to the EU market. Not true, I don't agree. And we want something else, more maybe adjusted to the risk. But where is the landing zone, and how do you, the demandeurs, ensure that the societal discussion is following? Strangely enough, the societal discussion has followed when we talk about the use of the techniques for medicines. For the development of medicines. So very clearly, the citizens can differentiate where there's a clear benefit for them in their health and something which so far they have conceived as, you know, more pesticides, more industrial agriculture, more concentration, more of things that deep down they don't want. So my question is, what are you really looking for? What would help? Thank you.
Dirk, you can answer to Sabine, but then I really have to turn to Dashin for a question from the audience. So go ahead.
Yeah, just from a scientist point of view, we find it very difficult to understand why there would be a different legislation for something that you can obtain by breeding and something by genome editing. It's just a method which is different. And that's very hard, but it makes a huge difference. For example, if you now want to go with the genome editing, the variety in a field trial, which is absolutely essential, if you want to really bring something back to society, it's virtually impossible. In some countries, there's really legislation. It's very good. It's really classical GMO legislation. But the problem, is when it's so difficult, so many rules attached to it, you can actually not do almost anything. And in some countries, I mean, Germany, France, and so on, I mean, field trials have been destroyed. So it really blocks any innovation in that field. And of course, we as a society, we should think whether we should allow for certain application. Maybe you can question whether you would allow for herbicide resistance and so on. I mean, that's quite obvious, but that's different from allowing at least the innovation to progress to value for society.
Okay, Lushin, you go ahead. Do you want to pick two questions from the audience?
Thank you very much. Lots of controversies on the chat, as expected. Marilyn, if you allow, I would pick two personal questions, because I think they summarize well the discussion. The first one is this actually not something of driven by all this discussion is not driven by demonstrating a social group identity, and other put it like affirming a lifestyle, and somebody putting, I'm from Eastern Europe. For us, the question is, how much can we afford? So this would be the first question to everyone. Should I put the second one or wait for the answers?
No, go ahead. Put the second one now.
Second one is very interesting. It came from somebody who says, I'm a farmer myself. I have a mid-sized farm in a European country, whichever this is, and says, I'm threatened by lots of dependencies, so much that I cannot do my real job of being a farmer. I'm dependent on plant breeders, I'm dependent on consumers, on politics, on young people, on television, on everything. Why cannot turn to what we call a healthy agriculture? I don't really understand what this is. And there was another question about thinking out of the box, like the farmer said. He had a long question. Why can't we think out of the box, for example, include genome edited plants for organic agriculture? So genome editing for organic agriculture, or ecological intensification, or try to get back from the way agriculture is being done right now, cash crops, intensive agriculture, rights of animals not being respected, and all those things. So 2 personal statements where I try to sum up the really controversial discussion, and I give it back to you, Marilyn.
Pekka, I think the second question is for you, isn't it? You just need to.
Well, I actually appreciate the question, because this is actually an answer itself. Like if we put these barriers in place in our minds, we will never get the desired outcome. In fact, for instance, in organic, I met my organic farmer members and amongst our member organizations, and we always have the same discussion. They are really aiming at better improved production method for themselves in organic. So it's the same productivity increase that they aim at in organic. But the reality is that they don't have the toolbox like any conventional farmer has for instance, with chemical substances. And I completely agree with the farmer asking the question that we are dependent, and we are going to be dependent in future also on our regulators. But then the point here is that how do we ensure that in the best case, like organic farmers can actually develop their own production in the same manner that everybody else, because they will be in a very tough competition with this requirement for 25% of the land use. If we have 25% of the land use in organic, we will have a different kind of organic sector. It's not what we work for or want, but imagine the competitiveness of the organic sector that has to be enhanced in order to exceed that 25%. It's going to be a different sector what we know now. And my heart goes out to the organic farmers. How can they do that in their personal livelihoods and make it economically viable?
So are you saying that organic agriculture and gene editing can actually work together?
If you simplify that like that, the organic producers have to improve also the same genetic material like everybody else. And I think Dirk made a point that it's about time. The same time scale is imposed on organic farmers, the same adaptation to the environmental phenomena that they see, for instance, in prevalence of disease and pest, is exactly the same thing. And the bigger the market share for the organic, the bigger the challenge is from the kind of conventional side that they would have. They face exactly the same phenomena. And in this respect, they need to be equipped like exactly the same thing, same way that everybody else. Look at the famous copper sulfate example. Why is it so sensitive for European agriculture? Because it's one of the last remaining tools to combat fungi. And we don't have a tool for the organic farmers to produce, for instance, in certain regions, wine. And if we lose these alternatives, that means effectively to those organic wine producers that they have to scale back or even stop producing their product. And this is not in the interest of society, and definitely not the interest of the farmers, the organic farmers that have made a huge investment into their production. So the same challenges are going to be there. They are not going to live in the bubble.
Understood. So that's probably one of the cliches that just killed in a second. Thank you for that. Who else wants to come in, either on this second question or on the lifestyle question? Anyone?
The lifestyle question was actually addressed to Viola, but everybody can answer. So I have another personal question from
Viola, do you want to answer or no? You're muted. You just need to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, there was a different button. No. Well, if you have another question, because I have to leave pretty soon, that's a little bit my problem. So I'm a little bit under time pressure. If you have one more question where I could maybe together do a final statement, that would be great.
Okay, well, I'll ask one, okay, because we need a consensus here, well, let's dream, but on how we can regulate. And so what should be the steps? We heard about the importance of science communications. We heard about the study at the Commission. So what are the steps, and what is a realistic timeline to modify, to reverse the current legislation?
You know, that's a $1 million question. And as I said, since the majority, at least in my group, in my party, is not really in favor of changing, and for some of us, where we try to open the process, I don't want to say we want to change everything, and there's no question about deregulation. It's just a question of what many people have said today: coherence, consistency in the regulation, and also more evidence-based, let's say, regulation, where I'm very much in favor of. But nevertheless, I respect majorities, and the majority is not there, not even in the parliament. So I'm very much looking forward to this study, which will be published at the end of April. I hope this is a good starting point for new debates. I also would use maybe the store a little bit more for, let's say, some side studies for off targets, for different disputable questions, where we could also already on the European level work on different issues. And then, yes, try to use the Horizon program for missions, for reach out, for trying to get the scientific-based community who is here now and who is very much committed, really try to prove and to show what you can do and why it is not just a commercialized high industry agriculture behind you, but really what you have said and explained before. Why could it be one milestone also for more sustainable, more for organic, and so on? So I don't want to convince anybody, but I would like to show, let's say, the portfolio of opportunities to people, and then they might decide. The question of labeling is still, of course, not solved, because it will be very difficult, but people would like to have a possibility to get labeled and declarations. So this needs to be solved, and I'm ready to debate on this, but I know there are many, many people who wouldn't like to have any kind of changes, and I do respect that, of course.
One final question for everyone here, and then we will wrap up. But in his first day in the office, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he promised to liberate UK bioscience from EU rules on genetically modified crops. So if and when the UK leaves the EU, pretty soon, it seems. So in parallel, some EU member states like Czech Republic, but also Germany, if I'm not wrong, have shown some openness to adopting these new breeding techniques. So there is a momentum here. And from what you said, Viola, there could be an engaged debate also in the parliament. But so how do we make sure? I mean, if the UK, that is right at the door of the EU, start doing its own thing, shouldn't we just? What can we do?
UK is almost far away, more far away than anything else right now, so I wouldn't count on them. But of course, there will be a competitive situation in terms of research and innovation, for sure. I don't know whether I would like to see this. As many have laid out, it would be better to keep our researchers in the European Union, for sure. And we have to see how we're going to deal with this new competition on the island. But what can I comment on this? Yeah, let's see what they finally deliver and how this will be regulated or non-regulated. But so far, it's just an announcement, and Boris Johnson is great at announcing politics.
Yes, indeed. Okay, that was a bit provocative. Final comment from anyone? Sabine.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody agrees that, a debate is needed, a fresh debate is needed, because we have, so to say, new tools. We understand better through the help of scientists, what can be achieved with these tools, how these could be used in a more democratic way. The Commission has, as I referred to, launched the Farm to Fork strategy. I mean, Commissioner Kyriakides is responsible for health and food safety. She has been, carrying that work forward in the Commission. And what this other aspect of sustainability food sustainability, you know, with the dimensions of economic sustainability, health, and environmental sustainability. What these offer is for us in Europe to discuss on the way forward, you know, what type of innovation we would like to welcome to Europe. You know, in this work, I mean, safety, no doubt. I mean, I don't think anyone is in any way opposed to safety for health and the environment, and some sort of assessment that new products that we are seeing, be it through NGTs or other tools which also exist, that this is fundamental to confirm safety. But I think the discussion out there and the societal concern is also around other aspects that I would summarize under the sustainability criteria. And what makes me optimistic is that in going forward on implementing the Farm to Fork strategy, in defining a legislative framework for sustainable food systems, so in defining what is sustainability for us in Europe, what is important to us, the environment, the social rights of workers, and so on and so forth. We can also more and more frame, you know, what type of innovation in the food area, for example, we would like to see in Europe. And if that discussion is well argued, well founded, we have the good examples, like we have, for example, in the medicinal area, you know, the atmosphere and the quality of discussion might change. So this discussion is needed. Everyone has to contribute with what they can contribute with. The delivery of the study is an opening for that discussion, in particular as the Council requested. So member states at large are ready to open this discussion. And obviously time has to tell, you know, in which direction we are going, but we have not to be one-dimensional in this discussion. There are so many aspects that all need to be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Those are very wise words. So I think this is a good summary, and so we will wrap up here. It is there is plenty of space for a debate, and it's probably fair to say that now more than ever there is space for every voices to be heard. So scientists have a very important task here in terms of communicating, probably jointly with the industry, and farmers do also have their say, obviously. So with this, I'd like to thank very much our 6 speakers. Apologize, we ran a little bit over time, but that's because we started a bit later, and I thought it was important to have this debate. So we will now take a break. And the next panel will start at 2:30 CET, so in about 20 minutes, 18 minutes. So please come back. The next panel will look at socioeconomic and environmental concerns of GMOs. So no, the debate is not over for today. Thanks again, and yeah, we wish you the best. Bye bye.
Bye. Many thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Colleagues.
Bye.
Bye.